chapter 4 is looking at species interactions and community ecology. So we're going to go a little bit further in depth into some stuff that's happening in the world around you. So if we take a look here, again, we have a review of what niche means. A niche, again, is the role that you play as an organism in your ecosystem. There are different types. There is a fundamental niche, which would be your full habitat if you had no competition around you. So what could you actually use as a resource? Where could you go if there was nobody else that also needed it? That's called your fundamental niche. Due to competition, most organisms don't display their fundamental niche. They display their realized niche. So if you look here, in reality, you can use all these resources, but because there's other species around that also use them, this is really all of the land or plants or location that you actually possess. So we call that the fundamental niche. So if we take a look at competition, because again, this is based off competition, some negative impacts of competition are reduced with stuff like resource partitioning. So if you take a look at this tree, the resources of this tree have been partitioned so that everybody can avoid direct competition, and the organisms use the resources in different ways. While the woodpecker, digs deep into it, this guy, he just climbs up the trunk looking for bugs. This guy will bore holes, which is nice because then maybe these guys can actually get bugs that burrow themselves in there afterwards. So everybody's using the tree, but they might be using it in different ways, in different places, in different times. And that does prevent some competition. You should know the predator-prey graph that's up here. Again, this should be a review from your freshman year. We know that the trends that occur here, so the hare is the blue line and the lynx is the red line. So when the prey population increases, you start to see then the predator population increasing after. If the lynx go up, eventually they're going to overeat all of the hare, and the hare population is going to drop, and then the lynx population will drop after. So make sure you understand those trends that go back into predator-prey relationships. The types of symbiosis that we're going to take a look at. We have parasitism. Remember, parasites are those things that actually harm a host or hurt it. You can avoid parasitism by camouflage, coloring, or mimicry. That's the stuff that's actually on this page here. So camouflage, coloring, usually yellow is dangerous, or mimicry. This is the back end of a caterpillar, and it kind of looks like it's its head, or I'm sorry, it's a snake. So stay away from the vital locations. Mutualistic occurs when both organisms actually benefit from the relationship. So these are kind of like those little sharks, or the fish that swim next to the shark and like clean it off. That guy benefits because he gets all the nasty stuff that's on the shark's skin as food, and the shark benefits because he stays nice and clean, or gets all the microbes off. The bacteria in your gut is a mutualistic relationship with you. You benefit from it. It breaks down your food and digestion and releases the nutrients for you. At the same time, it benefits because it also gets its own food. Commensalism, one benefits, the other one has no effect. So that's a clownfish with a sea anemone. They don't really bother each other. They don't really care that the other one's there. But the clownfish gets some coverage from that sea anemone. This gets into a little bit more at trophic levels. Remember, they show the transfer of matter and energy through an ecosystem or community. So you have producers that do photosynthesis, same thing as an autotroph. You have consumers, and the different type of consumers like carnivores that eat meat, omnivores that eat plants and animals, and herbivores that eat only plants. Remember, a consumer is somebody that has to rely on another thing for its food source. It can't do photosynthesis. So you take a look at this lovely example up here. Producers, they give their energy onto the primary consumers, who give their energy onto the secondary consumers, which are typically carnivores, and then the tertiary consumers. Everybody, though, at some point, at any level, could die, and then that goes to the detritivores or the decomposers. So we don't put these guys at the top or the bottom of a food chain. They're kind of just around it. they're going to recycle the dead matter and return that nutrients back into the soil for our producers to benefit from and start the chain over again. If we didn't have decomposers, there's no way this energy could be transferred as well as it can. We'd be in big, big trouble. Okay. Oh, we're stuck. There we go. So energy transfer. If you look at this lovely little graph up here, we have that 10% rule. Energy transfers through levels, it reduces by 10% at each level. So most of the energy that you eat is actually lost as heat. So let's say you take in 1,000 calories of grass. That 1,000 calories of grass, it took you 900 calories to hunt it, to eat it, to break it down, to make more cells in your body, and only 100 actually gets stored as energy later. If you were this grasshopper and this little chipmunk or whatever it is, and you eat the grasshopper, the grasshopper's worth 100, 90 of that 100 calories was spent for this little chipmunk to go running around, trying to catch the grasshopper, trying to replenish the cells in his body, trying to break things down, giving off heat as energy from his muscles burning, and only 10% gets stored. And this poor lovely hawk up here, he's only going to get 1 calorie of that original 1,000 calories. So it's actually beneficial to eat from a bottom tier of a food chain because you're going to get more calories. As a top predator, you're actually losing energy. There's less energy up there. And coincidentally, if you take a look at biomass, each trophic level gets smaller and smaller and smaller because there's less energy to sustain that population. There can't be more grasshoppers than there is grass. It doesn't work that way. So we see the pyramid go up. Make sure that you understand how to interpret a food chain. And that goes into this lovely image over here. Remember, the arrows go from who the grass gives its energy to the deer mouse. So the arrows go in that direction. And that's a huge thing. So all feeding interactions are found in food webs. Again, the energy goes towards the predator, the person eating it. Keystone species are a species that is super important, and if they're removed from that environment, they could have huge consequences. If you removed the hawk from this picture over here, the hawk was gone, the chipmunk population would go crazy, astronomical, which means that eventually over time, the grasshopper population might decrease, which would cause the grass population to blossom. So keystone species are those species that kind of keep a balance within the environment. Same thing happens with like sea otters. The urchin population will actually start to destroy the kelp forest in the bottom of the ocean. So we need to have those sea otters around to keep the urchins in check to allow for all the kelp forest to survive. We look at trophic cascade and basically just how species in the top trophic levels keep the lower ones in check. That's pretty much what we just talked about. And here's the picture of the sea otters. If they don't keep the urchins in check, the urchins will actually just mow down all this kelp, and that would be a problem if the otters weren't there. So if a population is able to withstand a disturbance and remain stable, it has resistance. If a community changes in the response to the disturbance, it has resilience and will undergo something called succession. There are two types of succession, primary and secondary. Primary will no longer have fertile soil. After a volcanic eruption, you're completely put down with lava, which turns to rock. There's no soil there. So bare rock, this would be primary succession. So after that would happen, the first species to colonize are usually lichens or mosses because they don't need soil to survive. And the cool thing is about them is they give off a little bit of an acidy substance. And then even when they die, they leave, they decompose, they erode the rocks, and you have a small amount of soil. over hundreds of thousands of years, if the lichens keep doing this, you're going to actually have a smaller and smaller and smaller amount of soil for these tiny plants to then come in, small grasses and herbs, and then you can continue. Secondary succession is when a disturbance would occur and soil is still left behind. This would be something along the lines of a fire or a flood that doesn't completely wipe out the soil layer. So succession that would happen that way, you're already starting with the dirt. So you're moving from about here to here, and you'll get your small grasses that come back, your shrubs, and the bigger trees. So succession does affect the total biomass of an area and species richness, because some species won't exist anymore after the big event happens. And sometimes, due to succession, the habitat changes and other organisms won't want to come back for a great deal long period of time until other stuff's been more established. So climax community is something that you should know. Once an ecosystem has returned to its healthy regeneration, the climax community for that climate has been established and will remain until the next big volcanic eruption or fire or something else occurs. Some places don't ever get to that climax community, but they call it a novel community, so maybe the world has changed a little bit and those big, huge oak trees won't come back, but you've got another type of forest that might be there instead. Invasive species are anything along the lines of like zebra mussels. They don't have natural predators in their environments, and because of that, they can outcompete the native species for resources, and they can usually reproduce really quickly. They're, for the most part, are selective. They invade, and they will actually start to hurt the K-selected species in that environment. Humans usually introduce these invasive species. Again, zebra mussels are the big ones that you guys have probably heard of around here. Asian carp are another big one. If they get into the Great Lakes, they'll outcompete some of our regular fish populations, and we'd be in big trouble. Okay, biomes. Again, another review from biology. Biomes are classified by temperature and precipitation and contain characteristic plants and animals that are found in that particular climate. So a desert environment is going to have more cactuses, etc. Distribution, though, of biomes has changed throughout time with global climate change or plate tectonic movements. So we have seen shifts, especially in the fossil record. We have proof that locations that were once cold actually have fossils of ferns. So at one point those were closer to the equator. We do see all those lovely little variations and things. So again, they are classified by their location, their temperature, and everything else. Make sure you know these particular biomes. I put the names in there that your textbook calls them as well versus what AP calls them. So there's a little bit of minor changes. But again, deserts would be the driest biomes as well as tundras. And then you get all the way over here to the wet and hot, which would be your tropical rainforest. So understanding how temperature and precipitation plays a role in biomes is super important. These are the aquatic biomes that AP wants you to understand and how those play a role. So on the next few pages, you actually have the breakdown of the different biomes. So take a look at these graphs, make sure you understand what's going on in different places. Temperate rainforest like Alaska is the largest rainforest in the world with the largest old growth forest that's never been touched or logged. That's this one right here. As you look at each graph, make sure you know the characteristics of wet and dry seasons, if there's a monsoon, or the types of plants that might occur within those environments. So these pages go through all of those terrestrial biomes.